So I'm in the process of retooling my short story that I've been working on for a little while. I basically retooled the entire opening, took some things out and added some things. I'm kind of hoping that this makes it a little better. After the critiques last week, I was very daunted about even starting this. So I'm going to read the first few paragraphs and you tell me what you think. The story is entitled, You've Seen the Butcher. The suspects sighed in apparent frustration and began their nervous tick of rubbing the bridge of their nose. MacArthur had noticed that they had rubbed their nose as they became more agitated. He had to admit their best friend had been murdered in a spectacularly gruesome fashion, and it would be strange if they weren't upset. And seeing as it was the third time MacArthur was about to hear the story, it was quite understandable. Multiple retellings of events by suspects or bystanders oftentimes shook loose details missed by a single retelling, and could condemn or clear folks of wrongdoing. MacArthur looked at Alex Garner again, taking note of their features. They were about 5 foot 4 inches, 130 pounds soaking wet, with gray eyes, a pert nose, and a heart-shaped face. They reminded MacArthur of David Bowie in his youth, looking androgynous but still possessing the beauty and litheness that some folks seem to be blessed with at an early age and never really lose as they get older. They didn't look particularly prone to violence, and his instincts about folks were rarely wrong. Still, it wouldn't be the first time his instincts had let him down, so he carefully listened to everything the suspect said, jotting down notes and questions in his notebook to revisit later. Upon meeting MacArthur, Alex had informed him that they preferred they-them pronouns, and while he struggled to fully grasp the concept, he made an effort to be respectful nonetheless. One of his father's many fables that he had drilled into MacArthur's head, usually spoken in that whiskey and cigarette-roughened voice, was, "Politeness costs you nothing and can buy you as much as your life, boy. Don't ever forget that." He would punctuate this by poking MacArthur's chest softly, usually eliciting a giggle from him. MacArthur had been with the State Bureau of Investigation of Utah for nearly 2 decades at this point, and he had a reputation of being tough, thorough, and tenacious. His family, immigrants fleeing the potato famine in Dublin, Ireland, back in the mid-19th century, could be traced back to a long line of cops, starting in New York City and spread like a virus to the city of San Francisco. The scene of the incident, though MacArthur wasn't fully convinced a crime had been committed yet, despite the strange circumstances surrounding the mysterious death, was a kitschy little diner. It had green carpeting and lacquered wood tables shaped from rough-hewn slabs, designed to look like they'd been crafted by a genuine mountain man in some backwoods corner of the United States, one where cousins often married cousin. The air carried the unmistakable scent of years of fried potatoes, bacon, and the comforting aroma of coffee, all of which seemed embedded in the very walls. MacArthur had more than a few meals at the Big Bear Diner, which had originally been named Black Bear Diner, but they were miles away from the diner at this point. MacArthur was a Utah State Bureau of Investigation officer. The State Bureau of Investigation handled a little of everything. Alcohol enforcement, meaning keeping the drunks in line and off the road, business crimes, keeping rich assholes from fucking over the consumer or worker, and finally homicide, keeping assholes off the street who kill other assholes. In his current hat, one that he hadn't had to wear in several months, MacArthur was investigating a possible homicide, one so gruesome that it made the first officer on the scene, a veteran of 24 years who had seen all manner of twisted and barbecued corpses line the highways he patrolled, threatened to quit on the spot. He was only a year away from retirement, and whatever he had seen in there had nearly cost him his retirement. The lieutenant wouldn't accept his resignation and gave him a week to get his head back together and mandatory counseling for the next 6 months. MacArthur had seen the pictures uploaded to the database by the forensics unit, and it had turned even his stomach. MacArthur shook his head vigorously, cleared his throat, and stared at the young individual in front of him. MacArthur believed in his heart of hearts that all humans had murderous tendencies hidden deep within their collective psyches, but the idea that such a spectacularly gruesome death that was suffered by the victim was beyond the scope of such an individual. Alex Garner, the suspect before him in the interrogation room at the Millard County Sheriff's Office was the textbook definition of a harmless individual. They were so painfully nervous, like a little kid who had been called to the principal's office over some prank or schoolyard fight that had gone too far. Given the way Alex presented themselves, MacArthur found it impossible to believe that they could have been responsible for transforming their friend into such a horrific tableau. But the results spoke for themselves. A bathroom covered in blood and other less aromatic bodily fluids, not to mention too many pieces of flesh and bone embedded into the walls. The only explanation that could come to mind when seeing the crime scene was the young man had been blown up by a pound of C4. But there was no evidence of an explosion, no pieces of shrapnel. That is, if you didn't count the splinters of bones and gobbets of flesh that painted the bathroom a garish red. No other indicators of an explosive device used in that area were apparent. MacArthur folded his hands in front of him, turned his gaze toward Alex, and used his neutral cop face. In his mind, he cataloged a lot of facts, most of which did not add the fuck up at all. After hearing this story twice now, he was well aware of most of the details. Yet with each retelling, he scrapped everything Alex had told him and paid attention as if he was hearing it for the first time. This was a technique he had used many times in many other investigations, and it had served him well. He would come off as obsequious in these situations, even sympathetic or empathetic as the case may be. He was very good at getting the suspect to trust him, to confide in him as if he was their best friend, and this was all a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a cup of coffee and a frank conversation. Alex's story was riddled with inconsistencies. So many elements simply didn't add up. The most glaring was that Alex stood before them as clean and uncomposed as could be. They had no blood on them, apart from the small amount on their shoes as they left the bathroom. Then there was the strange fact that, despite Alex and the victim passing by several patrons, not a single person remembered seeing either of them enter the diner or the bathroom where Martin Gutierrez's remains were found. The security cameras at the front entrance also failed to capture their arrival. Instead, during the estimated time of their appearance, the footage glitches. 30 seconds of static replaced the recording, and when it resumed, the camera angle bizarrely showed the diner's entrance from 8 feet above the door. MacArthur considered these details as he braced himself to hear what he was certain would be the most outlandish story of his career. What unsettled him was the nagging sense that Alex wasn't lying. In his long career, MacArthur had developed a keen ability to spot outright fabrications, but Alex's account remained consistent. Each retelling revealed more details, but the core of the story never wavered. And while Alex had some nervous habits of scratching the scars on their arms or rubbing the bridge of their nose while telling the story, they seemed more to soothe them in their anxiety rather than some subconscious admission of guilt. MacArthur flipped the page of his notebook to a fresh sheet and took a deep breath and said, "All right, kid. Take me through this one more time. What happened to your